Hello and welcome to this tutorial. We're gonna work with the portrait, but first let's talk about the colors that we're gonna use. I'm gonna put a list and I placed the paint on the right so that you could see what I'm using. First we're gonna start with an underpainting in warm colors. We're gonna use transparent oxide red to create a monochrome. Then we're gonna start placing some of the colors for the flesh tones, varying depending where the color is going to be applied. And then we're gonna finish up with the rendering of the facial features and all the details that come along. Okay, so to keep things simple, I'm gonna be using the paint as it comes out of the tube. There's gonna be no medium added. I think this is a way to simplify things. But of course we could be using turpentine or linseed oil, stand oil, or any other medium that you would like to use. In this case, it's going to be just pure paint. Okay, so the first stage is going to be to place the first lines, and what I'm trying to do here is pinpoint the shapes of the facial features. Here I'm not trying to be really specific about details, I'm just trying to orient myself in terms of where every element is going to be located. I'm also implying some of the shadow that's part of the reference picture that I'm using. And we're always using this mixture of terra rosa with transparent oxide red. I really like starting paintings this way because it simplifies not having to think in terms of color. We are only focusing on values. What I mean by value is how dark or light a particular shape is. So essentially we want to cover everything that's in shadow with this mix of terra rosa with transparent oxide red. In the lighter areas we're gonna be applying paint, but in a much lower quantities, just gonna be to create some really soft shading to avoid the white of the canvas. Notice that I'm dry brushing here. What I mean by dry brushing is that I'm not using any medium, so we're just applying the paint as it comes out of the tube on the canvas. This is a regular canvas, is meant for traditional painting, particularly oils, but you can use any prime canvas will do. The idea with these tutorials is to keep them accessible. I'm not going to be using any fancy equipment or crazy mixture of colors that you wouldn't be able to find in your local art supply store, because my goal is to make it as accessible as possible. Okay, moving on. Now we are starting to place some hints of the facial features. Looks like it's smiling. Yeah, it is smiling, but it's gonna look less cute by the time we finish. Now I'm tracing the contour of a shadow. With this particular image, we have part of the face is gonna be covered by what we call core shadow, and the other part of the face is going to be exposed to sunlight. So what I'm doing here is I'm defining the edge where the shadow and the light meet. So essentially we keep on defining these edges, applying little paint, not too much. We want to go slowly with this, otherwise we make a big mess of paint everywhere. So essentially we're just applying enough to create a darkening of the local value. I'm defining a bit of the edge of the mouth, working on the nose area. Part of the right cheek is going to be exposed to the light. So notice that I'm leaving a bit of a white spot there. That's going to be where the light hits. I'm defining some of the features on the left side of the face. These areas are in theory on the light side, but since there are folds, for example, when somebody smiles, it creates a fold next to the mouth on the cheek, and that's going to be in the shadow. Remember to keep the brush not heavily loaded. We're just applying very little paint at this point. Working on the shadow part. That's going to be the edge where the face ends, and we're going to start seeing some of the helmet. This is Stirling Moss, and he's wearing helmet. He was a race driver, one of the greatest of all time. And I thought that maybe it could be interesting to not only paint the portrait just with the face, but also of him wearing his helmet. Okay, we are starting to get some really good results with the what I call the underpainting, and soon we're gonna be reaching the point in which we're gonna be adding some new colors into this portrait. So the finishing touches on the left eye, and now we can start applying some more detail into the work. Notice that I've covered all the light area with a very thin coat of paint. Essentially what we're doing there is removing the white of the canvas. That's not only distracting, but if we have a thin layer of paint before we start adding the rest of the color, it's gonna make it easier on the flow of the brush, especially because we're not using any medium. So I'm starting to apply some of the darker earth tones. Here I'm using burnt umber to emphasize the eyebrow area. It's important to start recognizing where are the darkest darks located. This I like to place first. So essentially these are going to be places where the light is almost non-existent, or we have a material that is darker than the others. For example, if we're talking about eyebrows, usually those could be darker than other parts of the facial features. Skin folds, for example, in the eyelids, those usually are dark too, and they require this type of color. Places like the inner part of the mouth, if we are talking about somebody who's laughing or smiling or screaming. In this case, it's just smiling, so we're not gonna be having such a dark tone in the mouth area. Still, there's gonna be some darker parts, especially near the cheeks, where the mouth ends. Well, at this point we start to apply some of the colors that are gonna be on the light area of the face. So now I'm using a mixture of cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and a bit of titanium white. I use the cadmiums for the lighter part because these are warm colors. So if we're talking about sunlight, the sun is a warm source of color, especially in the golden hours, sunset and or sunrise. So I reckon this picture was taken in an afternoon. So we're gonna be placing the warmer tones on the light area. Notice that portraits usually have three color areas. We have the cheeks and the nose, which tend to be warmer than the rest. This is probably because the area here is way more translucent, especially in the nose. What I mean by translucent, if you ever had a torch, a light torch, a lantern placed just on top of your finger, you probably could see the finger in orange translucency. That is because flesh is translucent. So in these particular areas, we're gonna find that the tones of the skin are warmer. Then when it comes to the chin area, the jawline, especially in men, we're gonna be having more of a desaturated red, and could be even getting into the very desaturated blues. Essentially, the beard has a big component when it comes to the color in the chin of men. When we are shaved, those little tiny hair follicles, they make the skin look bluish and darker. And finally, we have the forehead area. Here, the old masters used to place a yellowish tone. Essentially, that could be achieved with, for example, some yellow ochre mixed with essentially could be transparent oxide red or cadmium red. So it's important to differentiate these three areas of color in the face. I'm starting to hint that, but it's not very clear yet. It's going to be even clearer when we advance with this portrait. I'm still trying to continue with the drawing. Essentially, now we're focusing on the upper part of the helmet. These are warm tones because it's going to be in the shadow area. When I work, usually my brush goes all over the place. I essentially, maybe I'm focusing on one area and then I continue to another because I see something that needs to be modified or changed. I'm sorry about that. I guess my brain works in strange ways. Could be easier if we just focused on the eye, let's say, the right eye. We finish that and we continue with the rest. But some painters, and including me, we tend to be all over the place. Essentially, it has some benefits too, because you kind of build up everything simultaneously and you're not just focusing on a tiny area. So it kind of gives you a perspective of how the portrait is advancing on an even level everywhere. Now I'm layering some shades of white mixed with cadmium yellow. This is going after the effect of starting to generate some 3D modeling, let's say. So it's really important not to go overboard with the white, especially because otherwise everything turns into a milky disaster. Because titanium white is a very aggressive color, and it will taint every other color and make it sort of milky. So we need to be really precise and use it in with moderation. Notice how I am defining that little shape of light that remained on the right cheek. Essentially, we're going to treat that one as a midtone. It's not going to be a highlight. Maybe I forgot to explain that. If you are new to painting, we have highlights, we have midtones, and we have shadows. So on the light area, we're going to have highlights and midtones, and on the shadows, we're going to have different technical names for the shadows. We have the core shadow, we have the reflective light, we have the occlusion shadow. For practical reasons, we're going to call it shadow, which is going to be dark or light. Essentially, the dark shadow is going to be where we don't see any light reaching. We briefly talked about that already, and the core shadow where we are receiving some reflective light. Let's say this is the mid shadow. This is mainly going to be because we have a secondary light source which is less brighter than the stronger one, in this case the sun. So on the shadow area we're going to have some reflective light, from essentially the sky, for example. Some bluish tint is going to be placed on the lighter part of the shadow, depending on the objects that surround what we are painting. If, let's say, if the face was near a tree, we might have some green reflective light bouncing on the shadow part. So it really depends on the environment. But because Stirling Moss was in the open, we're only going to be having some bluish tint from the sky. Okay, notice that I'm starting to define some details in the mouth area, trying to get the teeth right. Notice that we're not applying pure white. That's going to be like a toothpaste commercial, that's going to be fake looking. Painting the teeth takes a bit of practice. Essentially, we're not going one by one, we're just trying to build them up all simultaneously. And it is usually the case that we overwork the teeth and they look a bit fake. So the detail should be used with moderation, not going overboard with detail. Essentially, we don't wanna go overboard with any particular area in the face, unless we were trying to make a particular effect. Let's say that we wanna focus all the attention in the eyes, then we can go really deep into details. But in this case, we're not after that effect. So I'm not gonna go overboard into detail. Using the tiny brush to refine the edge of the shadow. It's going to be the core shadow. It's going to be the darkest part of the... Sorry, not the darkest part. It's going to be the darkest mid-tone of the shadow, let's say. Because we have some light reaching, but there's not a lot of reflective light there. Using the tiny brush to define a bit of the jawline. I usually like tiny brushes. They allow for a great deal of precision, and I don't mind covering considerably large areas with a small brush. It gives me the comfort and the precision that I need. It's like using a pencil, let's say. If you're using a pencil, you want that pencil to be sharp, so I use the brush more or less in the same fashion. Okay, we start to work a bit on the highlights. Highlights usually are pure white, not always. But in this case, since we have an underlying color in the particular case of the nose, it's going to be some mixture of titanium white with cadmium yellow and cadmium red. It's going to create sort of a reddish orange. When we apply the white and we work that in with the brush, that is not going to be white, pure white anymore. So it's going to be mixing with the underlying layer, unless we are working on dry paint. But this is not the case. We are working wet on wet. So every color that we sort of work in with the brush is going to mix with the underlying tones. And that is what we are after. We don't want pure white. We just want to lighten up the underlying colors. I am also defining some of the shadow part on the right cheek. It's always a matter of modulating and measuring how far we need to go with a particular highlight or how deep we need to go with a particular shadow. It's trial and error. There's no recipe. Essentially, one develops some kind of instinct after lots of practice, and that is what we're after. We're after that instinct that is telling us, okay, this needs to be a bit brighter, this needs to be a bit darker. That is essentially it. Okay, now with the rest of the helmet that we were neglecting, I'm defining the darker part of what's it called? I'm sorry, English is not my native language, and sometimes I struggle with particular terms. The part of the helmet that provides a bit of shade, let's say. I don't know if that is explanatory enough. Then we have the leather sort of under helmet protection that was wrapping around the chin area. So those we need to define too. Notice that when it comes to the drawing stages, I'm always using warmer tones. The mixture that we did at the beginning works really well for dealing with the drawing. And after that, once we are satisfied with the drawing, we apply the local color. That is not only giving us the solution of not needing to deal with the color from the start, but it also provides what we call harmony. So every color that is interacting into this painting is going to have a hint of those warm tones, and that's going to be creating a unifying effect that we call harmony. Essentially, that's the effect that a light source has. When we are out in the open and the sun is hitting the trees and the floor, the grass, or people, everything is affected by that light source, and that is going to be creating a harmony of colors. So that is what we are after when we mix these tones into all of the colors in our painting. Okay, working a bit of the sky just to fill a bit of the blank space to give some context. Now I'm applying some titanium white into the helmet just to create that illusion of being hit by the light on on the left side. It's important to consider that titanium white, is considered a cool color. So it's in the family of the blues. So essentially it's a cold color. We need to keep that in mind. If we're placing titanium white in an area that is supposed to be warm, we need to make that happen. So essentially we can introduce some cadmium red, some cadmium orange, some cadmium yellow, a hint of some red tone, could be alizarin crimson, could be also yellow ochre, but we need to modify the temperature of that color, otherwise it's going to be out of place. It's important to keep that balance. If we have warm lights, we need to have cold shadows, and if we have cold light, for example, in an overcast or a rainy day, then we have cool light, then the shadows are going to be warmer. This balance of temperature, it's what gives the painting a realistic look. So let's keep that in mind. I'm working on the leather protection with some yellow ochre and a bit of titanium white. The idea is to imply some more detail without going very crazy with overworking this area. Okay, I'm gonna be applying some final touches to the chin area. I'm wanting to do a bit of a final modeling there. And please, if you have any questions, if you need any further explanation on anything that we were exploring and discussing with this tutorial, I would be more than glad to go further into more depth. The idea is maybe continue doing specific tutorials about certain aspects that we were applying on this painting. Maybe, for example, modeling of the nose, or modeling of the eye, some sort of more specific approach into the facial features. So let's keep in touch. Please let me know if you have any questions, any comments, and until next time.